You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
We're back for another episode of the 21.5 Professional Pilots Podcast. I'm Max.
I am Dylan. Two professional airmen, two microphones, one amateur podcast. Very amateur. Actually, if you listen to this episode, some questions on the audio quality on here. We had to kind of hodgepodge in a couple.
But overall, if you listen to a lot of podcasts, I feel like our audio quality is in the top 10%. Thanks to you, mostly.
It's actually thanks to my dad. Shout out to Tom, because he used to own a recording studio and advised us on a lot of the equipment to use.
Well,
so
either way, Dylan does all the background work and the editing. And so big thanks to Dylan.
That's right. Happy to do it. A service to all of the professional pilots out there.
Yeah, real service, actually. We've provided, I felt like, this is the real purpose of the podcast. When somebody writes in and says that somehow it helped them anyway, and this was a big one. So why don't you go ahead and read this one, Dylan?
Okay. Well, we're going right into the mailbag, I guess.
Let's just
go right in. It says, "Hi, Dylan and Max. Wanted to send a note to say thanks for providing relevant and timely information. I'm a pilot with an interest in science and medicine and signed up for one of the COVID vaccine trials. I was literally 3 days away from the start of the trial when I heard the podcast with the AME. I would have been in a world of uh-oh if I'd gone through with it. Thanks again, Pilot for Humanity."
Yeah.
So if folks don't know what he's talking about, a few episodes ago, I believe it was episode 39, we talked to Dr. Tom Faulkner, and he let us know if you are a professional pilot, that the COVID vaccine trial will void your FAA medical.
Yeah, not if. It will.
Yeah. So definitely do not participate in that trial. And then here is the even more important thing I learned from him. Let's set the trial aside for a second. Once the vaccine is approved by the FDA, Foxtrot Delta Alpha, that still does not mean as a professional pilot you can get it.
Yeah, it needs to be approved by the almighty FAA.
That's right.
So we'll be following up on that as things progress, but keep that in the back of your mind.
Public service announcement.
Yeah, little public service, but also a really good reason to have loss of license coverage with Harvey Watt. Not only do you protect yourself against loss of medical, but also they have a great resource that you can call anytime for questions like this, any medication, anything, before you disclose it on your medical forms or you talk to your AME about it or you go down a path that you might not be able to backtrack on. You call Harvey Watt and they have the medical advisory committee and they tell you exactly how to handle these situations before it turns into a...
Yeah, it's included with all of their policies. It's probably one of the most valuable resources you can get. And especially for folks in business aviation, a lot of airline people have ALPA Medical or their union's medical committee. But for folks in business aviation, I mean, this is a huge resource.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And we focused on that whole series on a loss of medical. What episode? I don't know.
That was a long time ago. Episode 9, I think.
Yeah, right in the beginning. But that was super valuable to a lot of people. And we did get a lot of feedback about that. And that service is huge. Like I wouldn't take anything or do anything medically wise without making that phone call. Like it's the easiest 10 minutes of your life you can spend to potentially protect you from.
Do not rely on an amateur podcast.
Yeah.
For all of your medical
information. Do not take our word
for it. Call the professionals, but we're glad that listener wrote in, and you know what? It's a good reminder to folks because I mean, you just see in the news even this morning, Max. We're recording this on November 9th, a Monday. The market is way up because I think of a lot of the COVID vaccine news. So
yeah, 90% effective.
So I mean, and that's an easy trap to fall into, I think, for some pilots. Not maybe the trial stuff so much, but just my neighbor got the vaccine because it's approved
out
now.
Let's get in line.
Let's go
quickly. Everybody's doing it.
Yeah. So consult a professional. But thanks for the message, Pilot for Humanity. It was a good reminder. Let's see.
Let's talk about this one. Another email we got. One question I've always had for an insurance person. If a pilot is working full-time for an employer and does some contract work during their days off and has an accident/incident on the contract flight, will there be any exposure for the pilot's employer? That's from Dave. So, of course, when we have an insurance question, who do we call? Our friend Tom Haig at Wings Insurance. Tom's response, generally speaking, no, but I would be careful to confirm that you are doing contract flying under a formal pilot service agreement and perhaps billing the contract party under your pilot service LLC and or directly, in parentheses, unassociated with your employer in any way. You should endeavor to have all of this in writing with the party you are contracting with. And again, a formal written pilot service agreement would be the best, drafted by an aviation attorney preferably. You should take care to ensure that the pilot services you are performing are completely separate from your employee, i.e. setting up an LLC specifically for your contract flying work. It is also desirable that you secure additional insured/waiver on this aircraft policy which you are contract flying under for your pilot services LLC. Lastly, as respects to workers' compensation coverages for yourself, be sure that your employer's workman's comp carrier is advised that you are doing contract flying on the side, as they may want to specifically exclude the exposure in the policy, or worst case, they may forbid you from doing contract flying altogether. Every situation is different. To be sure to discuss this plan with your employer first and foremost to make sure all bases are covered and there is no unknown/uninsured exposure for you, the pilot, or your employer. For more on this, you can listen to our last episode with Tom, where we took a deep dive into the insurance and as it relates to you as a contract pilot.
Yeah. A lot of good stuff there. And I think when we talked about that episode, I know I learned a lot. You learned a lot.
Yeah.
When you do contract flying, there is some exposure there and some basic things you can do to protect yourself. So this whole episode so far, we're basically just saying consult a professional and CYA.
Yeah. Be smart enough to know to call somebody who's smarter than you about all this stuff. That's the real message here.
Absolutely. The last email comes in from Cliff. He says, you continue to kill it with the podcast. Thanks. Just listened to episode 41 and had to laugh when you talked about flying with ADS-B traffic information. I flew last week from, India 69 to Romeo Indio Delta and back. 100-mile, 1 hour nonstop flight at 3,000 feet MSL. In a 172 and had 3 code red for-flight collision warnings, meaning another airplane is at the same altitude within 2 miles and on a collision course. Each one scared the crap out of me, and I never made visual contact with any of them. Net, I agree with your assessment that we should just go back to the old days and not use this technology.
Was that our assessment?
Well, I just remember we said ignorance was bliss. Because I don't see. Do you have ADS-B in the Excel?
Yeah.
Like you can see traffic on an iPad, or see, we don't on the Challenger. We don't have a way to see. We have the ADS-B out, but we don't have ADS-B.
Yeah, no, we just have TCAS. We have ADS-B out, but just TCAS for in.
I'd actually be curious to hear from our listeners, the ones that are flying more of the business jets. Since most of us have TCAS, are you also doing a secondary feed with ADS-B traffic somewhere?
What would be the benefit of that? I mean, I know with ADS-B traffic, you get like a trend vector, like a vector that shows what direction they're headed. And I mean, you get altitude information. You get
you could get those like alerts from ForeFlight or whatever app you're using, but the TCAS would override it. So I don't know. I was just curious. Am I missing out on something, or I feel like I just stick with TCAS?
Yeah, I mean, I've flown small airplanes as recent as last week that have ADS-B in and out, and it's about the same as far as situational awareness wise and looking and then being able to look for traffic and figuring it out. I mean, there is the only other thing that I'm thinking is there's a little arrow that shows what direction they're going instead of staring at the TCAS and watching where the blip moves.
I guess the only other thing is probably you could see more, get a better idea of the traffic picture where, TCAS is only kind of showing the threats.
Well, depending on how you set, right?
Yeah. I don't know. Well, I don't know. If you've got a good setup with ADS-B in traffic, let us know, and maybe we can make our operation better. Who knows? And that's it for the mailbag today. You know, Max, we've got all those stickers I was talking about last episode. And I said, if you write us a review, we'll send you some. No one wrote a review, so I guess we're not sending them out. So just a little reminder, if you can write a review for us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show, drop us a little note and we'll send you something, or make a donation. Bottom of the webpage, we'll have a link in the show notes. We'll send you something as well. All right. Through the mailbag, back to flight advice.
Yes.
More people foolishly asking our opinions.
But if they ask, we will provide, I suppose, right? So this isn't necessarily somebody writing in specifically, but this is a friend of mine who is a retired airline pilot that is looking to get into the corporate side of things. And he has done several of the things that we've talked about that make it a challenge. Whereas he found a guy that's looking for a pilot. He sits down. Well, what do you want to get paid? And well, I don't know. What is, I think it was like on a Conquest. What would a Conquest pilot make? And nobody knows how much you're going to get paid. And then it's like, well, when would you want me to fly? And he's like, well, I don't know. When I want to go somewhere, I'd like to go somewhere. And so anyway, it was one of those things where nobody really knew what the standard procedure would be and what standard pay would be, or had any sort of reference like we've talked about to a pay scale or local knowledge, anything like that. So he's looking for, and I'm trying to explain to him, like, look, you're retired. Like, you may not want a job that dictates your entire schedule. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you want to do? And I'm trying to explain the difference of a salaried position, and how I've used this line many times with a guy that I used to work for to try and get it through his head. I'm like, listen, you don't pay me to fly. You pay me to be available to fly. That's the difference when you're on salary. Or I was trying to explain to this guy, or do you want to just be paid to fly, which would be you're only being paid the days you fly, but you have some more control over your schedule and when you fly, and then on the flip side, I'm trying to explain how, but not 100%, because if you keep telling people no, that when they call, the phone will stop ringing too. So there's some obligation there, and how training works and this and that. So it's a big learning curve and this is a retired airline guy who's flown a lot of GA. He has a 421. He has a Baron, Cessna 320, a Cherokee 180, a Murphy Moose experimental, all this stuff. And so he's a really good candidate for maybe like a single, even like a PC-12 or something like that, because he does have a lot of general aviation time, but he just doesn't know how business aviation works.
That is the real challenge there, especially it sounds like when he was meeting with that owner, the owner maybe didn't know a lot about how it worked either. So there's nobody knows. The one thing that I have encouraged other retired airline folks to pursue is that Cessna 421, the bigger piston. Those types of flying often can be really rewarding for somebody who's not trying to build time or gain certain experience.
Yeah. Or single engine turboprop. That's another great one. And the thing is, it's short legs, small bag. And I was trying to explain that to him too. I'm like, look, if you want it on an airplane that has lower operating costs, a lot of times it makes a lot of sense for you to fly, drop somebody off, and then fly the airplane home. I was trying to explain a bigger equipment. When I flew Gulfstream, a lot of times it was cost prohibitive to fly the airplane around everywhere. So we would have to fly the airlines home, and we still got home, but I would have much preferred just to turn and burn and head home.
Yeah, I think that's a good niche, especially when you look at you have some of the younger pilots in their career trying to move up. They're trying to fly the bigger equipment and sometimes may pass over some of those smaller turboprop or piston jobs because it's not helping them advance their career.
That's the biggest mistake.
And so if you have, if you can kind of backfill a little niche there, that could be helpful. And then also the training costs are less. And plus, you're probably doing more fun trips, I would think,
Yeah, I mean, that's so operator dependent. But so anyway, that's kind of our advice. A lot of times, if you're a retired airline pilot, you're looking to get into business aviation, there's really a lot of front end education that you have to really figure out before you're ready to sit down in front of a potential employer.
Education is key. ProPilotWorld.com, good place to start. Listening to some of our older podcasts, also good. Okay. Oh, that's the signal, Max. We have another featured furloughed flyer to talk with today. Just started out, well, we've been talking to some of these folks that are getting furloughed, kind of have a little 10-minute conversation, and got an email from one of our listeners, Richie, and we started to talk a little bit about his situation. Then he started talking a little bit about his background and the things he's involved in, and then all of a sudden I'm like, this could probably be an entire episode with all the stuff he had to cover. So coming up today, we're going to talk to Richie about his furlough experience and the mindset he's got. So that'll start things off. But then we're going to get into his history flying the Black Hawk. And what was most interesting to us was transitioning from being a helicopter pilot in the military over to the airlines with very little fixed wing experience.
Yeah, that was super interesting because I just had no idea how that was done at all. I didn't even know the rules, the regs, as far as translating that to an ATP or whatever. So we learned a lot there. He's a super interesting guy. The thing I continue to be impressed with these furloughed pilot segments that we do is everyone's attitude.
Yeah.
Everyone couldn't have a better attitude and just be like, hey, I'm embracing it for what it is. Spend more time with my family and I'll figure it out. And I have other skills. And so it always kind of comes back to your attitude and then what you have in your back pocket as far as skills or other stuff to fall back on. Soft
skills, as we will learn. In the second half of that, Richie was part of that networking challenge that James O'Neill and Ravens Careers put on, and James is going to join us and talk a little bit about that and provide some value, insight for folks that are trying to network on LinkedIn, like we've been talking a lot about on the show. They've put a bunch of people through this course now, and then James kind of is coming back to kind of talk about some of the things they've learned. Richie participated in that deal.
One of my favorite parts is how well some of these skills can translate to your online dating prowess.
Oh, that's right.
It's basically the same thing.
It is. So
how to start a conversation with people online, how to foster a relationship.
Well, it would be amazing too.
So great.
You get on these dating sites and use these techniques, and you don't even have a job. You're unemployed, getting all these phone numbers.
I can't wait to get an email from somebody who's like, yeah, I went through James's course and I got a job and I got 5 chicks on the line.
Yeah.
It's a whole
yeah, right.
Or dudes.
Yeah, who knows? So lots of interesting stuff in our conversation. And then to wrap it all up, Richie tells us a couple good stories from his Black Hawk days flying somewhere in the Middle East, I think. As you'll learn in this interview, I know, if you haven't already figured this out, I know nothing about military aviation. Max knows a lot about military aviation.
Yeah,
so
I wouldn't say a lot.
I ask all of the dumb questions. That's what I do. But all right, here we go. Got another featured furloughed flyer on the line with us.
If you will.
A furloughist, yes. For whom the flute plays. Welcome to the program, Richie.
That's what I came here for. Came for the flute.
Well, we shall deliver.
That's right. So, Richie, you unfortunately were a victim of the furlough here, like so many of our listeners recently. Can you tell us just a little bit about your experience getting furloughed recently?
Yeah, I'm probably the happiest person on furlough right now. It's a strange and interesting dynamic for sure. I'm 34 now, and your life, you just start doing the career progression thing, and you go through that normal motion of career progression of like, I got to get to this next step. I got to get to this next goal. I got to do this next thing. And it wasn't until I got to Allegiant that, things kind of really aligned for me and my family of being home every night, actually get to sleep in my own bed and stuff like that. And I actually enjoyed the road show. I enjoyed being out and doing the overnights and things like that. But until I got to Allegiant and was in my bed every night, and, I've got my 2 boys, and my youngest is autistic. So actually being there and watching the development and seeing the impact that it's having on him, I've now prioritized so many other things of just I'm more happy being home than I've ever been. And now we've got our emergency fund saved up. It's kind of sucks watching that emergency fund kind of go away, but this is an emergency. That's what
it's there for. Yeah.
Exactly. So, all things considered, yeah, we're a little stressed, but we're also lining a little other things up. I started the process of joining the Army National Guard here in Georgia. So that's a little bit of insurance for, pay, insurance, things like that. And then it'll just be fun to fly Blackhawks again.
Oh, Blackhawk pilot.
Yeah, second generation Blackhawk pilot, actually.
Second generation. Wow.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that.
We're going to get to that in 1 minute. So we'll just wrap up the furlough conversation here. Were you pretty close? Were you on the edge? Tell us about that.
So there were 2 rounds in October. October 1st was the first 100. And then we had a memorandum of agreement or understanding at the very end of October, where they, instead of furloughing the second 100, they only furloughed 30. I was number 99 of the first 100. And my sim partner, who is number 100, he actually picked up some reserve. He's a Navy reservist, and he picked up some orders. So I would technically be the first recall of those first 100 until they furloughed the next 30. So now I'm kind of like in the middle-ish.
It just seems funny. Like, what did the union have to say about how much money that really saves the company furloughing 100 dudes?
I don't know, man. Like, it's one of those things. So I actually just finished my degree with Embry-Riddle in the beginning of October, and I did a lot of papers on
Go Eagles.
Yep, go Eagles. I actually had done a lot of papers on Allegiant for my last few sessions, and so peeling back a lot on the layers. You know, our union, the Teamsters, are actually really good for us. We branched off from 1224 and created our own 2118. And since we branched off, these guys have been phenomenal. I like the Teamsters; they're pretty solid. So, but yeah, knowing our exco, he wouldn't have taken it had it not been the right thing to do. So, I trust his leader.
Tell me a little bit about how you approach recall, because I'm assuming there's no clear recall date or anything like that. Do you even think about that or try and focus on it? Or are you just completely focused on doing the guard stuff right now?
Well, a little bit of both, I guess. You know, like, I think about it, but it's kind of nice having the guard in the pocket, because if I do start progression with the National Guard, then I have the ability at that point to use USERA, which is the regulation essentially in the law that allows for National Guard and reservists to be called to active duty, things like that. So I know that I'm protected under certain cases with that for recall. But as far as when the recall happens, there's a lot of things that haven't been discussed yet. Right now, as far as the big thing that's being discussed within the union town hall stuff at Allegiant is training, recall training, because technically we're furloughed. So we're no longer employees-ish kind of thing. Like, we're on an employee list, but we're just not active. So when they recall us, are we going to have to go through new hire training, or are we going to go through a limited training? Well, if we only go through a short-term, short call training, what's to prevent them from doing this seasonally? Because we're a very seasonal airline. We make our money during the high periods, and then we kind of lose a little bit of money during the low periods, but it's okay because we make so much money as an ultra low cost carrier during the peak time that they can afford the drawdown. So then if they basically say, oh, well, you know, it's only a 2-week train up, that's nothing. You know, like, they could furlough us for the 2 months of the slow season, and then bring us back in, put us through two weeks of training. There's like so much precedence from the past, and, you know, reading all the fun stuff.
He just showed a book of Flying the Line, and Have you got to Hard Landings yet?
Not yet. So I'm reading the first Flying the Line. I'll read volume 2, and then I'll get to Hard Landing. But it's really entertaining to see how cyclical. I mean, seriously, we got some interesting emails from management during this whole back and forth for the furlough, and at the same time that we're getting these, you know, lack of a better term, hate mail. I'm reading Flying the Line, and it's just like, oh, hey, nothing's changed, you know? So, but, you know, aside from that, it really isn't that bad. Business is business. I knew what I was getting into when I came to the airlines, and no one predicted it being as bad as it's been. But, you know, there's the whole thing with the furloughs. There's those who have and those who will. So
yeah,
I'm glad I knocked mine out early. I guess I'm officially a real.
Get it out while you can still go back to the guard and everything.
Exactly.
At least I had an emergency fund, so I can't be too upset about it.
So I'm just curious. I've actually have not been furloughed yet, but I'm just putting myself in the mindset of when I worked at the airlines. There were times that I was very consumed with being trying to get all of the information, right? So being on the message boards, trying to stay up with everything, listening to rumors and all of those things. I imagine it's very tempting when you're furloughed to, every day be going, oh no, I'm hearing they're going to recall. Oh, they're doing this. They're buying it. Have you gone through that, or are you trying to distance yourself a little bit?
Well, I mean, like that's definitely a part of it right now, is that I let it eat away at me at first when it was like, this is happening. Like it's going to happen. And then all of a sudden when the email finally came through of I'm furloughed, and it's just like, then you go down this 5 stages of grief. and but at the same time, I don't know, like I try not to let it get to me, because like we talked about at the beginning, I had realigned my priorities. So I'm sitting there going like, man, this really sucks. But hey, I'll get unemployment, and and we got the emergency fund, and we got the National Guard that's kind of like working its way through, and it'll be okay. Like we just got to make it through these next few weeks. And in the meantime, I'm just going to make the most of my time with my family, and be there for my other friends. So I actually have one of my close friends. Yeah, so prioritizing time with family is the big thing. And I even have right now, we have a roommate. So he's actually one of my friends from the Army. Before I got out, I convinced a lot of guys while I was in the Army, hey, the airlines are hiring us Rotary guys. Like, you got to come out. The getting's good. The flow, everything's going to be great. And now he got furloughed too. He got his type rating on the 145 at Envoy, and basically sat just waiting. Now he got furloughed. So I was like, hey man, save money on your apartment, come live with us. So, we're helping each other out, kind of thing. So it's,
well, when it goes back, what you guys were saying before about researching the furlough and being on the message boards, and now it's like these Facebook groups that just go nuts and all this. I had this big group text with a bunch of guys at my airline too, and they're all talking about it and what's going to happen. And I'm like, guys, listen, here's what you have to realize. No matter how much of all this we do and time you spend doing it and discussing it, nothing, you have no control over this. Literally, it's completely out of your hands. And so the best thing you can do is sit back and wait for any sort of official communication from the company and the union, which always has its own views on things too, and just wait it out. And while that doesn't predicate you from, like we've preached a bunch of times, getting on LinkedIn, reactivating your network, doing proactive things that can actually make a difference, sitting here and going nuts about it, I think it just kind of slowly drives you crazy.
Well, sure. And I think one of the big things that I lucked out with as well was in my transition from American Eagle. So not only are we 3 Embry-Riddle guys, we're also Eagle guys. So that's pretty fun.
All of the listeners have turned the show off.
Yeah,
We just
there you go.
It's okay.
We got to add that to the soundboard.
Yeah. So yeah, during my last year while I was at Envoy, I was doing, a little more self-improvement things. I lost a bunch of weight that I've now gained my COVID-19 back. So no bad. This staying at home thing it's been rough on my diet. But either way, no, one of the big things though is I got into stoicism, and that has been pretty mind altering as well. So like you were talking about with the, that kind of like the serenity prayer, like, what do I have complete control over? What do I have limited control over? What do I have no control over? I can't control anything about my furlough. Like, they'll call me back when they call me back. Why am I going to lose more sleep about it? I've already given it enough sleep. Those days are like, I gave it time because, hey, I understand that I'm an emotional person. So granted, when I did get furloughed, I was upset about it. I was sad about it. And I had my little moment of like, woe is me. Guess what? 2 days later, it's time to get out of bed and get going. And, like, let's get going. Like, it's not like I was surprised. They told us for months we were getting furlough. That's like, the day happened and it was like, oh, I'm furloughed.
Yeah. It's always wise to focus that energy towards something more productive, right? And something you can control. And for all those pilots out there who need a definition on stoicism, I did have to Google it right now. It's the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint. I know you didn't know that either, Dylan.
No.
That's like the definition of what we say when you go like, oh, you're stoic. Like, I'm into stoicism as far as like what the like Aristotle and the teachings of like ancient Greek philosophers and things like that.
You mean the school of Hellenistic philosophy founded by the Zeno of Kitticum and Athens in the early 3rd century BC?
This is great radio. We're gonna have a second podcast of just Max reading Google. Yeah, this will be great.
Yeah.
Max reads Google for everybody. So I think that's really good perspective, Richie. And I know so many of our listeners are going through that same journey that you're going through right now, and many of us have in the past too. And it is one of those things, like you mentioned, this year has been so interesting for so many folks being able to refocus for a little bit. Like you said, spending time with your family and being able to create new habits and start new routines. So I think that part there will be, I think sometime in the future, I will look back at 2020 as a pivotal year and maybe even with some fondness at some point, because there were things that I got to do in my life that maybe had nothing happened that I wouldn't have been able to do. But
well, I'll tell you, 2019 was worse for me than it was 2020 had been. I got furloughed in 2020 and we got the shutdown and everything else. And 2019 was still the worst year, or a worse year for me than 2020 was.
Jeez.
Wow.
But that's just part of it. Like there were personal struggles and a lot of personal development. So I came into 2020 with a better perspective that allowed me to take these hard times and actually be able to get through it.
We have been getting a ton of messages from, I don't even know, what are you supposed to say? Rotor pilots? Helicopter pilots for the matter? I don't even know. They're demanding content. So let's talk about your Black Hawk days. Give us the rundown. You said give us a rundown on your Black Hawk days. And you said you're a 2nd generation pilot?
Yeah. So before I knew my alphabet, I actually was able to identify helicopters by sound. So I grew up, my dad was a retired warrant, which in the Army, so we have like most people are familiar with the normal ranks, the commissioned officers, which are your lieutenants, your captains, your majors, your colonels. And then there's the enlisted, private, sergeant, things like that. And then there's a middle grade that most people don't know about, and it's called the warrant officer. So the job of a warrant officer is to be a technical and tactical expert. That is the literal definition of being a warrant officer. So my father actually was a warrant officer in the U.S. Army. He went through WOC's Warrant Officer Candidate School in the late 80s. He was a medevac pilot in Desert Storm. Even had a little bit of time in Task Force, which is 160th Special Operations guys during the mid-90s. And so I ended up joining. He, of course, told me my entire adolescence, join the Air Force, like most every Army pilot will tell their kids, please go do something like the Air Force instead. And I was like, no, but I want to do what you do. So I always just wanted to fly Blackhawks because that's what my dad did. He was an instructor pilot. So I, always wanted to be an instructor pilot too. Ended up joining end of 2006, went to WOC's, or actually enlisted into the National Guard because I did my freshman year at Auburn University, ran out of money, had too much fun, tried to join the North Dakota National Guard to go to UND to go to their aviation program. Was like, what am I doing up here? So I dropped my active duty flight packet and got accepted. And that's kind of my long detoured route to actually become a pilot in the Army. And then, ended up getting Blackhawks. Went to my first unit, was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. But prior to going up there to join the 101st, they sent me to what is the UH-60 Mike model course. And at the time, it was the brand new Blackhawk on the street. It was glass cockpit. The U.S. Army in the late 2000s was entering the mid 90s. It was really cool. I ended up going to the first unit that ever got the Mike models. So they were coming back from their first combat deployment with the Mike models. And I was integrating with them. And it was really interesting too, because I got to not only learn a new aircraft that the people at flight school, when they were teaching us, they were like, Sikorsky says that you should fly it like this. And then I got to the unit and they were like, this is how we did it in combat. And it's always fun and interesting when you start learning the differences between how school works and then how you fly on the line. It's the same thing in the airlines. But after I spent 5 years at Fort Campbell, I was in the air assault for 2 years. And then I went over to the medevac for 3 years. And from there, I went came down here to Savannah, Georgia for third cab or 3ID, third ID entry division. And I'm just throwing out a bunch of lingo, and it's really entertaining because you guys will post this, and a lot of the Army guys and military guys will be like, "Oh, you were in 101st, Fort Campbell, yeah, whatever." And people go like, "You keep saying all these acronyms like Mike models, and what is he talking about?" So this is the content these people are wanting.
That's right. Max actually is pretty good at military aviation stuff. I'm like a zero. So,
nice.
But so I love learning about it. But I think what I would be really curious about hearing about, and this is what we hear from so many rotor folks online, is in the past, it was really tough for military helicopter pilots to transition into civilian, right? I mean, what were the options? And then talk about how that's expanded into getting into the airlines a little bit.
Yeah, so this is actually really fun because when I decided to get out of the Army, this was 2016. I had done 8 years. It's for the Army. Like, I'm really looking forward to joining the Guard. I've got friends that are in the unit. It's super cool. I've gone down and done a tour of the facility. It's going to be great. My time on active duty, on the other hand, was a struggle. I had high aspirations for joining the United States Army because my dad had been in it, and it was always a lifelong goal. So when my career didn't quite pan out the way that I had hoped it would, I started trying to job search. And at the time, about 2 years prior, the OH-58 Delta, the Kiowa Warrior, or what you might know as like the Bell Jet Ranger, like the
Jet Ranger
Chopper 5 at the the local news or whatever, that aircraft had been divested, and the Army had gotten rid of it. And a lot of the pilots, the majority of the pilots, were basically told to hit the street. So within the 2 years prior to me getting out, the market was flooded. Not just flooded, these guys were all like the 58 Delta guys were guys that were just like, they flew their butts off in Afghanistan and Iraq. These guys were just masters of that aircraft. Like, hats off to all the Kiowa pilots. Those guys are awesome. And so when they ended up, having to get out of the Army, being forced out of the Army, goodbye HEMS jobs, the helicopter EMS jobs are all gone. There was not anything to be done. And to get out of flying a Black Hawk to try to, get into a Robinson and pay for it, like, it was just like, yeah, man, I'm not going to drop $10,000 or $20,000 to learn how to fly a Robbie to maybe get like an ag job that might pay back my loan. It's like, so what am I going to do? So I started looking around, and one of my friends that I went through high school and flight school with, he had made a post on Facebook of him standing in front of a CRJ 200 and with him and his family. And I was like, oh, Mike's an airline pilot. Oh, that's cool. Like, let me message him like, hey, buddy, how's it going? You got some time for a chat? Like, yeah, man, give me a call. So I was coming back from a convention, and I basically had just realized during this convention of handing out resumes and that I was never going to fly military helicopters ever again, or helicopters in general. Like, I was going to be behind a desk, and that's not for me. I've got so much more flying left in me, kind of thing. And I see my friends post on Facebook, and I was like, hey, can I reach out to you? So end up talking to him for 2 hours on the phone, and I'm just eating it up. He's telling me, he's like, I paid for, the last year that I was in the Army. He went to Kansas State, got all of his ratings in Manhattan. He was stationed at Fort Riley, and got all of his fixed wing ratings, paid for his time building, or I think he became an instructor and did his time building that way, whichever way. And then he ended up getting hired on with PSA.
Shout out PSA.
Yeah, PSA. No, it was funny because like I had no idea about this whole Eagle PSA riff until I got to Envoy, and I started telling my captains, are like, so what bring you to the airline from the Army? And I was like, oh, my buddy over at PSA. And they're like, we don't have friends at PSA. So anyways, yeah, so I ended up talking to my friend, and he convinces me. He's like, you got to be an airline pilot. The time is now. There's no way. It's so funny because all the things that you guys said in the first episodes of your podcast about like your time interning at American, it's like there's no better time.
It's never been better. It's the greatest time.
Better. What could go wrong?
The opportunity is incredible.
It's just unprecedented.
You're gonna make millions.
It always is.
You'll be a captain so fast. Oh, it's so great. It's the same thing. I'm sitting there, and my wife's just like, she's just like, there's no way. I can't convince you now. Like I could see it in your eyes. You're doing this. And I go back to my unit, and I remember it's like, guys are just like, so what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to be an airline pilot. And some of my friends are like, oh, hey, don't you got to start off at like the regionals? Like, yeah. And they're like, one second, real quick. Just like you, Max, was like, Google, how much does a regional airline pilot make? $30,000? What? Are you insane? Like, why in the hell would you do that?
And then they got out the socks and the bars of soap.
Yeah, I was like, but the future is bright. Like, it's gonna happen. It's gonna be great. I'm sitting there like Jerry Maguire in our pilot lounge, going like, "Who's coming with me?" And no one wanted it. Like, no one was having it. So I start my ratings. I take out a loan to start my ratings, and I'm knocking them out like basically on the weekends. And I'm hearing these rumors about this program called the RTP, the Rotor Transition Program, that Envoy had started. And they were the first ones on the block that had created this program. And they had done like a soft open kind of thing where they were like testing out like 50 pilots or something like that out in San Diego through the Coast Flight School. So they had put these 50 pilots through this program, and it was a success. And they were like, this is happening. We're going to do this. Like, we want more helicopter pilots. You guys are easy to train, easy to get through the program, like, and to get onto property. So I remember calling. It went public on like a Monday or whatever. And
what year is this, Richie? Do you remember?
This is 2013. I want to say it was like the beginning of November that it went public. And like they'd been doing it since like June or July or something like that, but they were just starting to get their people, and they were like, "This is officially a program. RTP is a thing. This is going to happen." So I called their recruiter at Envoy, and I was like, "Hey, how's this RTP thing go?" And she's like, "Send me your resume." Sent it off, and she's like, "Yes, like we want you to come interview." And I was like, "All right, sweet." And I'm used to the Army where everything, and it's funny, like I'm joining the Guard now, and everything's taking like multiple days of like, hey, what's going on? Like, I need something. And then it's like, meanwhile, the recruiters at Envoy are just like, can you interview tomorrow? And I'm like, what do you mean tomorrow? Like, I'm in Savannah. You guys are in Dallas. How am I going to get there tomorrow? Oh, the magic of the airlines. But they're like, yeah, I mean, they gave me like 5 or 6 options. I was like, okay, sweet. So I call my commander. I'm like, hey, they said that they started this program. I want to interview for them. Can you give me some extra time off to go do this? Super awesome commander. My last commander was super awesome. He lets me go, but he's like, I was like, I want to do it on a Friday so that I'm here for the entire week kind of thing. And so I send back to the recruiter, hey, I'll do Friday. And I was like, hey, by the way, like, how many people are you interviewing on a day? And she goes, about 8. And I was like, how many are you accepting of those 8 for the RTP? And she's like, 8. I go, okay, stand by 1 second. I call my commander back. I was like, yeah, I'm not going next week. I'm going like in 2 days. Like, there's no way I'm missing this opportunity. Like, and I told him this, and he goes like, oh yeah, you're gone. Just go. Like, I was like, sweet. So I called back, adjusted, moved it up a week, go and interview. And man, like, it's so funny. And I've told James this before from Raven Careers, like, we have a relationship going back a little while for trying to get to the majors. But I remember telling hair-raising horror stories about being an Army aviator and like flying in combat. And my recruiter is sitting across the table from me going like, what? Did what? No. And he goes like, well, how are you going to handle like a disgruntled captain? And I was like, well, as long as he doesn't put his hands on me, I really don't care. And he goes like, what do you mean? And I was like, oh, if you go into that room right now and ask any of those Army pilots, have they ever been assaulted in the cockpit? They'll all say yes. It's just like, so as long as nobody hits me, we're cool. Like, I'll fly wherever with whoever. Like, it doesn't matter. It was so much. Like, I said so much more that I know I'm never allowed to say ever get in an interview. It was interesting. So yeah, got through the interview, went down they'd moved the flight school from San Diego to San Marcos, Texas, which is just south of Austin. And yeah, at that point, I already had my commercial single engine. So all I needed was my commercial multi add-on and time building. So the way the RTP works at most of the airlines when they existed before the whole shutdown thing was they would take our commercial instrument helicopter rating and we would just do add-ons. Because at that point, we could use either GI Bill if the school was VA approved, which Coast was not at the time. But you could take your GI Bill and get additional ratings. And because you already have a certificate that says that I'm a pilot, Well, then an additional rating beyond that from private to instrument or commercial or ATP is considered an add-on rating, and the GI Bill will then cover it. The only thing, though, is that you have to pay for your private unless you decide to just go straight to commercial. You can actually go straight from a commercial helicopter into a commercial fixed wing. I wouldn't recommend
Is that
it.
what you did?
To do it. No, I got my private, and then I got my commercial, and then my instrument commercial single engine, and then I got my multi. But yeah, so once you get all your ratings, you should be about like 90-ish hours or so in total of pilot and command fixed wing time. And for the restricted ATP, or just an ATP in general, if you're already a helicopter pilot with enough time, you only need 250 pilot and command fixed wing hours. That's it to qualify for an ATP. And so you already have the 90. So then essentially what they just do is the company is paying for my time building to just burn holes over Texas to reach the 250 criteria. So essentially the way that Envoy's program was like, hey, your ratings are on you. And then after you get your ratings, we will foot the bill for your time building.
When you come from being a helicopter pilot to then getting your private, like, is it hard or is it easy? What's the transition like?
So I'm kind of a low time guy during combat, to have a combat deployment, stuff like that. So I'd spent just shy of 10 years in the Army, of which 8 of it was flying helicopters. And I only had like 1,100 hours total of actual flight time. So, but even then, that length of time, and that's still pretty decent amount of flight time for non-combat time frame. Like during war, like flight times are just giving flight time out. But peacetime Army, 1,000 hours is a lot. Either way, it was enough time to build up some habits. So my first flight it was what was that? This little light sport aircraft. It was like a V-22 Raptor or something like that, or it was like some European ultralight kind of plane or whatever. And I'm doing my first approach, and he does the first landing. We take off, we do some more maneuvers, and he's like, all right, you want to do this one? I was like, yeah. We start coming in, and I'm not realizing that as we're getting closer to the runway, and this my normal side picture that I'm used to seeing on a Black Hawk helicopter, flying, and I just start pulling back, and he's just like, okay, airspeed is life. Rule number 1, Mr. Helicopter Guy, airspeed is life. And he pushes forward on the yoke. And no, it's because in a helicopter, you land to a point. We don't generally do run-on landings or roll-on landings unless there's like an engine failure or something like that. And even then, we're still practicing because we might have to put it down. You lose an engine, you got to put it down in the trees. You don't want to be moving. Like you don't get to pick your LZ sometimes or your landing spot during an emergency. So you want to land with as little forward speed. So we have competitions on like those Cub competitions, who can land to exactly, I want to put the left landing gear on that spot. Like, let's put down a Coke can or something like that and try to crush it if you didn't blow it away. But, whatever. Like, you would just pick a spot and you always try to land to it. So 1,000 hours of muscle memory of me going, I'm going to land to that spot and I'm not going to move an inch. You can't do that in an airplane. But naturally, you start coming in and you see the sight picture of the runway getting close, and it's like, I'm going too fast. And it's like, no, you need to be going this fast. Like, there's a runway. You have the entire runway to slow down. So there was a lot of habits. And honestly, even in the Airbus, I have to tell myself, just land it. There's runway. You will slow down on the runway. But there is a tendency for helicopter guys in general, when just on the landing, we want to flare really early, really far back. And it's just because the sight picture is here. I'm now seeing my approach rate. I want to slow to nothing. And it's just one of those things where I honestly just had to tell myself to stop doing that. Like, every approach, it doesn't matter. Like, I still do it. I'm going to go back into the sim and I'm going to tell myself, don't flare. I'm not going to be saying it out loud, but that's just my little my little mind trick.
So when you finally did build up your time, then they just put you in whatever the next class is at Envoy.
Yeah.
And then off you go. And did you find going through the training for the aircraft, was that a challenge? Was that similar to the military as far as the initial training?
Not even a little bit, man. So military training is really interesting. because there's a lot of, it's syllabus driven, a little bit more so than in the airlines. Like day one, you do this, day two, you do this, you know, and it's kind of like the airlines, but you got to remember there's no real timeline. You're in the military. Like they're going to try to speed it through, but like you're getting paid no matter what. The government got their money. Like, you know, the DOD has already got their money. Like,
yeah,
you know, they already passed the bill. So whether you finish today or tomorrow, it's kind of negligible. In the airlines, time is money. Like, so you're going to finish tomorrow. Like if you can finish tomorrow, you're finishing tomorrow. And that was the big thing of getting out of the military, is that in flight school, it can take anywhere from a year to 2 years to make it through flight school. But the thing is that the information is significantly more compounded. Like you're not only just learning about flying a helicopter, you're also learning about tactically flying in a helicopter. You're learning about implement this helicopter while navigating at terrain flight, trying to find the LZ that, you know, like we have, it's in here somewhere. I've got my old map that I had to make in flight school, where they gave us paper maps and you got to like sit there with arts and crafts style with glue and cut everything. And you have to, we call it an Aussie fold, because like it flips up and down and left and right. So it's like, and then you draw your route on this map. And, you know, we have like dog houses. It's literally, it looks like a dog house because it has, you know, the top roof on it. And then it's got these 3 or 4 blocks on it. And it's time distance heading. There's a road going left to right or southeast to northwest. It's going to be intersecting with a power line. This is going to be my point. We're going to cross over it at exactly this time, GPS time. And there's the power line. I see it. Reset the clock. All right, sweet. All right, we're turning this heading, and you're describing it, and you're going through all of these little phases that you're going through, all to come up to a field and then land on that field. You know, land in that field, and not just land in the field, but land to a specific portion of the field, because we're supposed to be simulating dropping off troops. So it's, where do the soldiers need to go? Where is the enemy? You know, how is the enemy affecting the terrain? Am I allowed to fly over this area? You know, so there's like a lot of things within flying a helicopter. Applying that towards actually flying tactically becomes a little more complex. Now, the airlines, on the other hand, is like, we need you to graduate tomorrow. So it compounds. There's not as much information, but it is fire hose. And I remember telling my friends, it's like, you better bring your A game. Like, yes, you are military aviators. Yes, you have a lot more, you have a lot of skill that maybe kids that we're instructing might not have experienced and stuff like that. But like, these kids are hungrier than you. And you need to step up to the plate, and you better be ready to study and study hard. I'll tell you, my time at Envoy, learning that aircraft, I ended up getting the CRJ 700, and it was, man, that training ate my lunch. Like it was bad, but I learned, I learned a lot, and definitely, by the time I got to the Airbus, it was like, all right, sweet, once you go through one training iteration with an airline,
you get the program ironed out, and then it's no big deal.
It's funny, but that you'll always remember that first training. Yeah, absolutely. So in our last few minutes here, I wanted to chat a little bit about RTAG and what is the current, obviously the climate right this minute. We're recording this in November of 2020. Nobody's really getting hired anywhere, but there will be a time again when airlines are going to be hiring. There's still going to be folks in the military looking to make that transition. Can you talk a little bit about what the current landscape looks like?
Yeah. So the restricted ATP for military pilots is you can go all the way down to 750 total hours, of which, for a fixed wing ATP, it's 250 fixed wing hours. So technically somebody could graduate flight school with their 100, 120-ish hours of helicopter time from the military and just do 2 or 3 years at their unit and then knock out their 250 hours of fixed wing time and go be an airline pilot. The National Guard and the Reserve are about the only places where you can just go straight basically from flight school to the airlines for the most part. The rest of it, though, you're generally going to have to serve your contract, which the Army just increased their time from when you pin your wings. It used to be six years. Now it's 10. So it's on par with the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Air Force.
Hold on. So it's 10, and that's after flight training, which can take a year to 2 years or a year and a half to 2, or what's the average?
Yeah. We call them ADSOs in the Army, additional service obligations. The day you pin your aviator wings is the day that you owe your time. And
it's
it
10
was
years
6
now.
years when I went through in the Army. When I went through flight school, it was 6 years. It is now 10 years. because, hey, that's what the other guys are doing. Well, the other guys also give you fixed wing ratings, and, you're also in the Air Force, not going to the field, bitching about your rental car. Meanwhile, in the Army, you got to go to, one field exercise after
bitching
the
about
other.
your tent.
Oh yeah. My last field exercise was an individual pup tent, and it was the most non-real Army thing I've ever done in my entire life. Like, it was so funny. Like, we're out in the field, and I'm like looking around at my senior warrants. And it's just like, hey, you invaded Iraq. Like, didn't you? Did you ever sleep in a pup tent? And they're like, no. And it's just like, what are we doing here? Like, what is going on? Yeah. Oh well, expeditious. It was the new word at the time. Expeditious.
Expeditious. That's funny. So, what are your guys that are going to get out, or have you been? Because you kind of help facilitate this, right? With guys that are getting out of and mentor people that are getting out of the military.
Getting out right now to go to the airlines. Still, like, they're just like, hey, I'm out of the military, and I will just wait patiently until they call. Most of these guys are retired, so they're getting.
Okay, so they have retirement, so it's.
But there are a few people that are just like, I'll freaking do whatever I got to do to make ends meet, but I'm not staying in the military another day. It can be it can burn you out sometimes. There are a lot of guys that, leave the military and are pretty disgruntled about it. But, hey, everyone makes their own decision. Some people come out to the airlines and decide that it's not for them too. We got lots of guys that I've worked with, that I went through training with and did my time building with, that ended up doing the first 6 months at Envoy. And they were like, yeah, this isn't for me. I don't like this. I'm going back to flying helicopters. So, and that's kind of one of the really nice things for RTAG, which is Rotary to Airline Group. It's an organization that started shortly after I made the departure for the airlines from the Army, started by one of my friends, Eric Savaston and Josh Lee. It is a veteran to airlines program. So it started initially as a pilot transition program for mostly, it's just helicopter guys, Rotary to airlines. That was the whole intent, was to switch and be advocates for the helicopter guys going to the airlines. But now it is pivoted towards a veteran to airlines. So it's not just pilots. We're also helping out mechanics. Hey, do you have your A&P? Get your A&P while you're in the military. Get out. Go be an A&P for an airline, or for Embraer in Nashville, for example. Dispatchers, flight attendants, everything. Like, RTAG is now kind of trying to fill that, like, hey, veteran to airlines. We're here to help you in facilitating. Because the other thing is that, I don't know if you guys know this, but when a civilian company hires a veteran, they get tax incentives. Like, they actually get tax kickbacks for hiring protected veterans. So essentially veterans that have served in combat overseas and things like that. It's a great organization. I've been volunteering for them. I've been a mentor with them for a while, and just helping guys getting out and making the most of their GI Bill, things like that. And then more recently, I've been doing mostly like a staff writer position, just writing articles for initially they have a magazine that comes out during their conventions. And then they have the website rtag.org, and I've got some articles up there. So.
As it always is in aviation, once things are kind of firing on all cylinders, you're like, yeah, they really got this going. And then now, all of these different programs just kind of come to a halt. But I think what's exciting is this one probably has a lot of momentum, and as things pick up again, it's going to help.
The other thing that's really nice is that RTAG doesn't, and not only is it a veteran to airlines, but it's just a veteran to civilian kind of transition thing too. Because after the last convention that they had in Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is southern Alabama and also home of Army Flight School, they started bringing in helicopter companies. So now you have the helicopter EMS companies, you have the helicopter contracting companies for the flight school down at Fort Rucker, Amentum, and a few other participants, and they all loved it. So they're going to be coming out to the next convention, which will be announced here on the 11th, actually. So Veterans Day, November 11th, RTAG is going to be announcing their scholarships and their scholarship winners, and they're going to be announcing the next location for the 2021 convention. So one of the big things that's really awesome for the conventions is that they're free. I love going to, I went to OBAP last year and I absolutely loved it. I had such a great time. RTAG is such an interesting and different experience though from my experience at OBAP, just because, it's mostly veterans, and it's a weird dynamic, because it's like, oh, hey, I work at Allegiant, but oh, you want to work at Spirit? Come with me. Let's go over to the Spirit and we're going to help you out, because I know you and you're an awesome dude, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help you out. Or even if I don't know you, it's like, you're part of our tag. Like you're my brother. You're my veteran brother. Like we served overseas together. I'm going to help you get hired. So it's just it's a really interesting dynamic at this convention where it's like, and it's also kind of another interesting place where it's like companies get to put, their money where their mouth is and like, hey, do you support your veterans? Cool. Come support your veterans. So no, it's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to finding out where the convention is going to be 2021. And the scholarships are also really big. There's going to be 4 scholarships, and even American Airlines actually donated miles to the scholarship recipients. So you get to
That's cool.
Get to travel with them. Yeah, it's really neat. So just help them get guys ready to go to the airlines.
Well, let's bring in a surprise guest, Richie. It's James O'Neill, ghost from your past.
Doing?
Hey, James.
What's up, James?
What's up, gentlemen?
So, James, a few episodes ago, you shared a generous offer to a lot of our listeners about the LinkedIn networking boot camp that you guys were putting together. And as we were talking to Richie, it turned out that he actually participated in that program that you guys ran. So we thought, this would be an interesting time to talk to you guys a little bit about how it went and what you've learned. And I don't know if you can give away any trade secrets or not, but we could have an interesting discussion on it. So James, for our listeners that maybe didn't hear, can you just kind of quickly cover that program you guys did?
Sure. So we did a giveaway of our 7-day boot camp. So we do 20 hours of networking instruction spread across 7 days. We do it in a group setting in a private community. You get the benefit of learning from other people's successes and failures, right? The objective is, I don't have enough time in my life to make all the mistakes myself. So I'll let Richie make some of them for me and then have him explain to me why I shouldn't do it that way. And so it's been a lot of fun. There's been a boatload of things that have popped up that we would not have expected. And folks have had a lot of great success with it, which is what's been pretty cool.
So, Richie, were you paired with a few other people, or how big was the group you were in?
Yeah. Well, when we first started, there were a bunch of names, but then the ones that actually ended up actively participating, I want to say it was closer to like 8 or 10 that were active participants or so in our group. And what's funny is that we actually have our own little chat group still on LinkedIn, and they were messaging me before we started recording this episode. So we're still chatting about like how everything's going. So that's really, really cool.
James, when you're plugging these people in, what did you learn about mixing the different types of folks? Did you try and do all airline in one group, all business aviation?
No, we made it a free-for-all and just threw everybody in there. So there were a couple of things that we learned. So the one thing actually Richie just brought up, when we started the 7-day boot camp, we looked at it as, hey, we're going to give you 20 hours of networking instruction. You're going to get the benefit of working together as a group. We didn't understand how tight the groups were going to become afterwards. So Richie's group has their own LinkedIn chat going on after that. The group prior to Richie, a couple of the folks made some really tight relationships together. And one of the folks in the group ended up getting 2 other folks in the group face-to-face meetings with chief pilots. So that's probably, we were thinking about it just in terms of external networking, right? Like folks that are looking to network with recruiters and pilots of other companies. If I'm brutally honest, we underestimated the impact that the groups would have just in terms of staying in contact together and helping each other. And Richie could probably talk more about that than I can, but it's been phenomenal to watch that trust and the camaraderie, last well beyond the challenge.
So it's like a furlough mixer almost, right, Richie? I don't know.
Honestly, no, I wouldn't even say. So we talked about our tag and the conventions and that kind of brotherhood kind of feeling like, oh, hey, I'm good, but I can help you out kind of thing. And that is more of the feel of it for sure in this group. So yeah, that's, guys are sharing like so essentially like the LinkedIn bootcamp thing is you get basically tasks with, how to, not quite how to network, but, hey, go out and try to collect these kinds of networking connections, and it puts you out of your comfort zone, which is really cool. I mean, like, there's nothing really that he's not really selling anything that's, isn't quite already out there. But the thing is the distinction of like using Duolingo versus going to a Spanish class, actually paying an instructor that's going to help you. Like James is that instructor who's going to actually hold you accountable. And within the class too, you're holding each other accountable. So it's like when you're trying to do it on your own, it becomes more daunting. And this program is really awesome because it increases the amount that you're putting yourself out there. But even beyond that, you're putting yourself out there and then you're sharing notes with each other. Like, oh, hey, I just tried to connect with so-and-so. Man, it got awkward. And they're like, oh, you think that was awkward? Check out this chat I just had. And, but it's really cool though, because like at that point, then it's like, oh, okay, like how do you transition the way that you and I are talking right now into a chat? How do you do that with social media? Like, and that was one of the big lessons that I had on like one of the first few days. I was trying to tell guys because they're just like, oh, well, trying to network. I was like, hey, when I went to OBAP, I already had the job with Allegiant. So it made networking and going to OBAP so much more enjoyable. Like I was having fun,
Right.
But then at that point, then it also came into play. It was like, well, because people knew I wasn't trying to use them for stuff. Like all of a sudden they're just like, oh, hey, come over to this private party. Hey, go do this. Like, let me introduce you to my friend over there. And it's the same thing. It's like, I'm furloughed from Allegiant right now, but I'm enjoying my time home. I know I'm going to get recalled. When am I going to get recalled? I don't really know. So when I'm trying to network looking for jobs, it's one of those things where it's like, hey, I see that you work at this company. How's that going? Like, that's kind of cool. I didn't know that was going. It's just the pressure's off. You don't feel like this class is teaching how not to act like a sleazy salesman, like you're trying to sell them your car and your beater out in the lawn. So
one of the other interesting things is that the group is mixed. We just thought that only folks that were getting laid off would do it. We have a number of folks in there that have not lost their jobs and either just recognize, hey, look, they need to expand their network, or they're concerned, hey, they don't know what's going to happen in 2021. But like Richie said, the way the boot camp is designed is, on the first day we do an hour and a half group live presentation. And it's probably about an hour of us teaching different skill sets, and then it's about 30 minutes of people asking questions. And then each day after that, the challenges are specifically designed to have you implement one of the lessons that we taught in that day one hour and a half. And they're designed in a way to push you outside your comfort zone and allow you to try things and fail so that you can speed up the learning process and the failure doesn't hurt you. So it's pretty cool to watch folks start on day one literally struggling. And by day, 3, 4, and 5, they're like, whoa, I'm having trouble keeping up with the amount of conversations I have going.
And you're launching your spinoff for Tinder later this month, James. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
How well does this translate across platforms, James?
So that's actually hilarious.
It's pretty good.
It actually really does. So we had Richie. I don't remember if this guy was in your group. He might have been in two groups before you, but he wrote us a message. Man, it was probably like 2 weeks after the challenge was done, and he goes, "Hey guys, by the way, my wife just complimented me on how much better of a listener I am. She doesn't realize I'm just using the exact techniques we talked about in the networking boot camp." So it's funny because folks use it in their personal life, but also in aviation, right, in the professional environment, all the skills that we teach, we use LinkedIn. The purpose of LinkedIn is to get a conversation started so you can take the conversation off of LinkedIn. We're trying to get you on the phone. We're trying to get you in a Zoom meeting. We're trying to get you into a live interaction with a real human being. And so, we're obviously joking around about Tinder, but the skills that we teach work off of the platform. You can use them on Facebook if you run into someone there. You can use them on, obviously people are using them on LinkedIn, but they also use them on the phone. They use them in Zoom meetings. The skill sets that we're teaching are they're not confined to one platform, which is why they're so powerful.
Did you find a certain type of person doing better? Like, do I already need to be really outgoing or extroverted to find success? Or were you finding different types of folks getting out of their comfort zone? What did you see?
Yeah. So look, the reality is pilots are type A, right? So they're super goal oriented. They're super task type people. So if you give them a clear direction, hey, I need you to go do this, this, and this, right? That's why we all love checklists. Mm-hmm. When they have a clear idea, they're aggressive. And I don't mean aggressive like, Attila the Hun. I mean aggressive like when they have a clear vision and a goal, they're gonna go achieve it. So those are the positives of pilots. The negatives that pilots struggle with is, pilots are the folks that are sitting in the corner during a party, right? They're not social butterflies. They're not outgoing. Do we have, one or two per challenge that are, like the outgoing type? Yeah, we do. But the vast majority, 85, 90% are really introverted. They really struggle with getting conversations going. So it's not common that we get someone in the challenge that's, overly comfortable. What they typically struggle with, and Richie can probably talk more about this than I can, but they struggle with how to get a conversation started. It's really awkward to talk to a complete stranger and not come across like you're trying to sell them or you're trying to push or you're being transactional. And so that's really what the first part of the challenge is doing, is just teaching people a systematic way to start conversations with strangers where you're not going to tick them off, they're not going to run away, and they're not going to view you as like a creeper. And then once once you get the conversation going, then it's the art of how do you kind of direct the conversation? How do you keep it on track? And so, most of the course is focusing on how to be relational, not transactional. But the funny thing is, we had a couple of folks here recently, they're in the challenge and we're, focusing on, hey, look, don't be transactional. Don't ask for anything other than a conversation, right? You're just trying to get a conversation started. And I want to say like a day in, one of the guys is like, what do I do? The guy just asked me if I can send him my resume to walk it into somebody. We're like, well, give him the friggin' resume. He's like, but I don't want to seem transactional. It's not. He asked you, So it's like people, it's funny because folks get caught off guard, right? When you do this relational stuff, what happens is people end up, they make the move to ask if you want any help, not because they have to, but because they recognize, this guy's treating me like a human being. And it just, like I said, Richie can talk more about what his personal experiences have been like, but it makes a substantial difference in terms of how people view you, how much they're willing to interact with you. And to be honest, right, when we're networking, we're trying to build up a network of warriors, not poets, right? I want the 300 out there, willing to wage war to get you a job at that company, not somebody that's going to go take your resume and just kind of chuck it into the HR's office and go, here, look at this guy.
Yeah. Well, like we were talking before James came on about philosophy stuff, and Immanuel Kant is a famous philosopher, and he's quoted as saying, you treat people as means and not ends. And that's kind of one of those things that I always try to keep in my mind when I'm trying to talk to people. Is it's not that, you're not trying to use them as a cash register to take out money. You're not using them as that end. So when you're using LinkedIn, a lot of people are using LinkedIn because it's like, well, why else? They've got that little open for work badge on it, which just basically screams like, help me, I need a job kind of thing. And instead, if you're going on there, just like, oh, hey, cool, you do this, I do that. Like, let's talk. I don't want to get too much into the nuts and bolts of the class and stuff like that. But I mean, like, that's probably one of the more interesting things is if you start just human with people, like the way that we're talking right now. If you can transition that into social media, it only helps, and yeah, it's just like trying to talk to the girls, a hot girl at the bar. You're going to get shot down. But you're going to try, at least it's either you
it is a numbers game
at the bar. You either talk to the girl at the bar or you sit in your little corner and sulk about and daydream about talking to the girl at the bar. Well, life's too short. You got to live it. You
got to put yourself out there a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So look, you're exactly right. It is a numbers game, right? So we had this guy, Doug, early 50s, right? So he decides to sign on, gets a LinkedIn profile, signs up for the 7-day boot camp. He did not have a LinkedIn profile before we wrote it for him. So when I was done talking to him on the phone, he had to actually sign up for LinkedIn. So he signs up for LinkedIn. We rewrite his profile. It takes about a week and a half, 2 weeks to do that. And we turn the profile over to him. And then in between when the profile was complete, he started the 7-day networking challenge. I want to say it was like a week or two. And he got 14 connections in that week, right? So not a substantial number. So he gets 14 connections, probably mostly people that were that he knew already. So he just shot me a message here the other day. He goes, "Hey, James, I was in your LinkedIn challenge. It started on September 26th. I began that challenge with 14 connections. Today, I'm reporting 501 connections 26 days later. My LinkedIn presence helped me with setting up 2 informal interviews for possible corporate positions that have not been advertised yet." So I went, "Doug, that's awesome, man. How you feeling?" He goes, "Well, I feel a lot less stressed about the whole daunting process of finding and interviewing for a new job and much more confident about what might come, thanks to Raven." Right? It is a numbers game. And Max, you hit the nail on the head. Like and Richie said it too, there's going to be rejection in that. But the point is, when you have a systematic and repeatable networking process, the rejection doesn't matter, because if you just keep doing what we're telling you, you hit numbers like what Doug has. Then the rejection becomes worth it, because you're getting someplace.
James, you are always critical of my networking advice, so I'm going to run my latest strategy by you, and we'll see what you think.
Eagle Aviation Careers. Hold on, stand by.
Eagle Careers. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will reach out or a lot of times I will get requests to connect on LinkedIn, and I'll always look at their profile first. And then I always respond with just what I need, another ERAU connection.
Yeah.
Remember. And you know what's funny though? And I kind of make a smiley face or something, but I start off with a joke every time, which if you know me in person, you know that I like to joke a lot. And that actually really gets the conversation going. And almost everybody starts with a laugh. And I like to get the conversation off on that foot.
The reality is when you're out talking to people you don't know, you've got to do something that makes you different. Right. And that's what you're doing there, Dylan. You're actually showing a soft skill, which is the ability to relate to others through humor. And the way that we talk about it is, right, soft skills are what gets you jobs, right? That's, do you have the ability to self-assess, right? Do you have the ability to work well with other people? Are you motivated, right? It's these soft skills that sell. And a lot of people think about this in terms of, I have to go sell my soft skills, when there's a much easier way to do it. And that's what the networking bootcamp is about, right? When you go to Costco, they hand you out free samples of pizza, because it turns out it's a lot easier to sell you a whole pizza if they give you a sample taste than if they spend 10 minutes talking to you about how tasty the pizza is. This networking bootcamp is just about handing out free samples of your soft skills. And what you did there, Dylan, is exactly that. You sampled a soft skill for them. That's how you build deep, meaningful connections through a process of what we call building out the spider web. So you can start that with a bunch of Riddle folks. And then what you'll notice is you'll get second, third, and fourth tier connections that now are no longer Riddle people. And it's pretty cool to watch that structure for the person get built, where, in the early part of the challenge, they're talking to people that they know. And towards the end of the challenge, they're talking to people they don't know. And they're having, like Richie said, it's conversations like this. They're not really trying very hard. It's not this robotic, shoot, let me think about what I'm going to say next. It's a really natural, really organic conversation.
But there's some times where you just reach out to LinkedIn people and you just don't get anything back. And you want to reflect on it as a failure for yourself. It is kind of like walking up to the hot girl at the bar and she ignores you. Like, there's some things worse than rejection, and being ignored is probably the biggest one. And I think that was something that on the group that helped out a lot. It's like, oh man, I reached out. And it sucks when you're on social media. It's like, they saw it. You see that they saw it.
Yeah.
They intentionally ignored you. Which is like, man, that sucks. It's like, yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Pass. Hard pass.
Hard pass. Damn it.
By the way, when you take someone like Doug with those 501 connections in 26 days, he probably has a 70% failure rate.
Yeah.
If you, just to give you an idea on, once you have a systematic and repeatable process, you can fail 70% of the time. These are like baseball odds, right? So I'll kind of give this away, right? Day one, people start making the connections, and like 10 minutes later, like, oh geez, the person didn't reach out. You're like, dude, it's been 10 minutes, right? Like let's give it, we need to give it, right? People don't have a realistic expectation on how long it takes for someone to respond. Day three, they're going, I can't keep up with my day one conversations, right? And that's only at a 30 or 40% success rate. And we tell them on day one, hey, look, 30 to 40%. So if you reach out to 10 people, 7 people are just going to reject you. And you know what? They're not going to reject. It's going to be what Richie said. They're not going to reject you by writing you a message back that says, hey, you're irritating me. They're just going to ignore you. But on a 70% failure rate, right? Think about it this way. If you had a 300 batting average, you're MLB material, right? You're getting a $20 million contract. Well, it's the same way in LinkedIn world, right? On a 70% failure rate, you end up with 501 connections 26 days later. We're not shooting for anywhere near perfect. We're shooting for good enough, because good enough gets you 3 interviews and 2 job offers. You don't need to be anywhere near 100%. 30%, you're getting 3-4 job offers out of that.
Sounds like a super valuable class, especially for, like James says, the quote unquote average pilot, the guy that's in the corner of the room, not the guy dancing on the coffee table at the party. But
I like the coffee table.
Well, you gotta,
Dylan laughs. You know where I got that one from, don't you?
Yes, I do. Are you going to run any more of these classes, James? Was that it, or is it what's the kind of the future of this deal?
Yeah, so we got 2 more that we're running for the remainder of the year, and then we have one additional one that we're adding as an all-female group. So we had a number of our female participants say, hey, look, can we do one just for women? So we're going to do an all-female group as well.
Well, fellas, we certainly appreciate you guys taking time to kind of break it down a little bit. It can be daunting out there, and I'll tell you though, the amount of folks that we have heard from listeners that are more active on LinkedIn in the last 6 months is really amazing. And our platform on social media, by far our most followers and engagement is all on LinkedIn now, which I never really thought would have been the case. But that is where a lot of pilots are now. And it's exciting. And the thing that I really like about it is there's a lot less BS on there than the other social media networks. So I just feel like your time is much more well spent there than anywhere else. So.
Yeah, it seems like people that come on LinkedIn are actually trying to have a focused approach to doing something versus just bantering and
it's a professional community. Don't get me wrong, you're going to see some stupid politics stuff on there, but for the most part, right, 99% of the stuff on there is professional. So
I much prefer my LinkedIn now to my Facebook.
Yeah, sounds like it. The happiest takeaway from this is that James approved of an Eagles careers tactic. So that's what I'm walking away from this. I'm validated now.
Now you got chapter 1 of your book is now complete.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. All right. Well, James, if folks want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Info at Raven Careers, INFO. Otherwise, they can just head over to the website, www.ravencareers, RAVENCAREERS.com. And then there's a contact us link. It takes you right to my personal calendar. They can put time right on my calendar.
Awesome. All right. Well, appreciate your time as always, James. We will let you go. We're going to keep Richie on the line for one last final There I Was story for the episode. And so you'll have to tune in and download to hear what he says.
Well, I'm going to have to listen to the before and the after now. Now you got me
right. Yeah. All right, James. Thanks.
Later, James.
All right, thanks, guys.
See you, James. Bye.
All right, Richie. We end every episode with a story. I know you've got a lot from your days in the Blackhawks. So can you tell us a PG-13? Do you have anything that not top secret, you can release? Family friendly?
Definitely got some R ones, but no, I'll definitely go with the PG. So yeah, my first combat deployment was 2011. I was with the 101st. We were deployed to Kandahar and in the southern portion of Afghanistan. And we were doing a resupply mission to bring some maintenance or items or something like that to for our detachment out at Barbed Wire, which is a Marine Corps base. It's about like an hour and a half, I think, flight across just open nothingness over the Registan Desert, which I only found out towards the very end of the deployment that it was the Registan Desert because we just called it the Reg. You like the Reg Desert. And I thought it was because it was red, because it is literally like, it looks like green. It was red desert out there. So it was like, wait, the Registan, like it's a G? They're like, God, Richie, you're so dumb. Anyways, so we're flying across this desert and it's nighttime. And a lot of people don't know this, but our night vision goggles need light in order to work. So part of our weather brief that we get from the Air Force is an illumination report. So on like a 100% illumination, you're talking like full moon, all the stars out. You can see everything clear as day, like in the movies. A zero lume, on the other hand, is the night vision goggles gets what's called scintillation, which is like, it almost looks like a static on a TV. And that's the only thing. It's just basically like black with a little bit of green. And you see these like little white, things just popping up on your night vision goggles. So this is a zero lume night. we're flying across the desert. So we call this tactical instruments because we're flying in Afghanistan, which has no instruments other than emergency GPS approaches. And we're flying in formation. Luckily, there's no real weather between, the aircraft and the base, but still, it's just the only thing I'm seeing is the flashing of Chalk 2. So I'm only seeing the flashes of my night vision strobe going from the tail through my aircraft, and I'm seeing the silhouette of the shadow of my helicopter on his helicopter. Like that.
I was just going to ask you. So you guys do have like a night vision beacon or something on the other helicopters if you're in formation?
All of our lights have just regular lights, and then they also have a IR mode. So we actually had a switch in the cockpit and the overhead that actually goes, it's like all IR. So you just flip that. And then we also had a switch to turn off the strobe, because when you're flying in formation, you don't want everybody to have the strobe light on. You only want chalk glass to have it. So it's really entertaining when it's super dark that the strobe is on the aircraft. So when it's flashing through you to the other aircraft almost, and you can see sometimes the silhouette of the aircraft on the aircraft in front of you if you're close enough. It's pretty cool. So we're flying along, and it's been a long day. The sun's set, zero loom, whatever, cross cockpit. So I'm in the left seat. We're flying in left formation. So I'm looking across the cockpit through, that little, and the forward dash has that line that breaks up the windshield. Well, this causes the visual illusion where it actually will break your eyes can't adjust looking through the window. So the frame of the aircraft in front of you actually splits. It's like looking through water. It's really cool looking. But either way, so it's challenging. It's probably the most challenging that you can do in formation is flying at night, zero loom, cross cockpit. But we're flying tactical instruments. So we're just basically following a needle straight to the fob. And as we're going, I'm getting tired, and I'm like, I'm a talkative guy. I've got to talk to stay awake. So I'm just going to start talking. So it's like, hey, crew chief number 2. Yeah, how you doing back there, man? Crickets. And I was just like, oh, all right. So I turn around and take my eyes off of truck 1, and I turn around and look, and there's my crew chief in the back. His door gun is just stowed. There's nothing really to worry about at that point, but it's just out, just pointing to the ground, and he's just hunched over, just hunched over, passed out. And I was like, oh man, oh, he's out. Can you believe this? Yo, crew chief number 1, can you believe he passed out? Like, oh, that's crazy. Crickets. And I was just like, what? And I look over my shoulder, and I can only see his head, and he's just face down, just passed out too. And I was like, damn, both of our crew chiefs passed out. That's crazy. So I look over at my pilot command. I was like, yo, man, can you believe this? They both passed out. And I look over, and he's sitting straight up. And I was like, yo, what's up? What do you? And then I realized when you wear your night vision goggles, we also have a battery pack that powers it, and it is Velcroed onto the back of it. And guys will put Velcro on that battery pack to put the counterweight, because these goggles are heavy, so that it's not forward sagging. He took that Velcro and took the cushion off the back of the seat and had attached his helmet to the back of the seat. So he was sitting there looking like he was awake, but he was out too. I was like, oh my God, nighttime, zero loom, cross cockpit. And I'm super tired. So I start talking to everybody, and I am the only person awake in the aircraft.
Oh my God.
It was all right.
That's when you hit the engine fire test button right there.
Yeah. What did you,
well, so here's a little more entertaining. The same kind of flight, we're flying from Kandahar to Dwyer, and it was a day flight, and we're bringing guys back from leave. They went home on R&R, rest and relaxation. So it's their 2-week vacation for a 1-year deployment. Anyway, so we're bringing them back to Dwyer, and they go to sleep because they're not flying. They're just packs in the back. They're just hanging out. We used to mess with their packs depending on who they were, and especially if they were other pilots. And it was just all right, guys, well, on every flight, we have to do a test fire of all of the munitions. You have to make sure that the machine guns on the side of the aircraft work. So generally when you get over, there's test ranges where you shoot at. But when you're over the desert, you just shoot this. What you going to hit? Nothing. So we're all right, cool. Have we popped off any flares recently? I was like, no. Well, let's make sure that these flares are good, that they haven't gone stale too. chalk one, hey, we're going to be doing a test fire and popping our flares. We'll be breaking down into the right and, whatever. Like, we're just like briefing this because we're flying at altitude. And sure enough, it's like, all right, you guys ready? And it's like, all right, ready. And we just like, taking fire. Boom, just snap roll this thing over and just like put it into a dive, popping flares manually. The door gunners are like just doing their test run on there. And you just see everybody in the back just like, it's the best. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Those are some fun times.
That is an experience I cannot relate to, even 1%. But pretty amazing stuff. Well, we certainly appreciate your service to our country and staying awake on those dark and lonely nights, apparently.
Across the red desert.
Yeah, across the red desert, man. That's
the reg.
Well, you've been an inspiration, Richie. I know there's a lot of folks out there that are looking to make the same transition you did. And I think it's so cool that you're involved with RTAG, and there's an organization out there to help veterans get into aviation. Airlines, they need that kind of talent. And it's cool to hear that you say, the pilots were able to make the transition with such little fixed wing time. That's really encouraging. So
make no mistake about it. It's hard, but it's challenging. But no, I think that's one thing that's nice is that RTAC community, like we help each other out a lot.
Well, we will put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes if anyone wants to send you a message, harass you, or maybe they have their own Black Hawk story to share with you. But thanks for taking the time to join us today, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Yeah.
Thanks, Richie.
I'll talk to you guys whenever. Thanks for hanging out.
All right, buddy.
Run, God.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 43. Thanks so much to Richie and James.
Always interesting to talk to those guys. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Harvey Watt, and all of our listeners.
Appreciate all of the emails.
Email, support, donations, all that stuff. It means a lot. Thanks, guys, for listening.
Absolutely. Would love to send you a thank you if you can leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify. If you want to get in touch with us, you can send us an email, info@215podcast.com. If you've got something for flight advice, we have that anonymous form on the website. Just go to 215podcast.com and then scroll down and you can send us your question. We will attempt to answer at 215podcast on Instagram for more hot content there, and LinkedIn. That's what we talked about today. That's where we're on. That's where you should be.
That's right. Link up, link in.
Even Max is participating in LinkedIn. That's the surest sign that it's valuable. So I've been impressed with what you've been up to. I almost feel like, are you hiring an outside consultant to help you or something?
I may have a little something up my sleeve, similar to my fantasy football activity.
You didn't get a single listener to help you with your...
I know. What a disappointment.
Yeah. Jeez.
Whatever.
All right.
I found someone.
That's right. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. But until then, remember,
flexibility is the key to air power.
And yoga.
Many other things.
Run, God.